A very good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to TiEcon 2023. As we kick off our 3 days event here in this convention center, I'm pleased to introduce you to our fireside chat speakers. To begin with, I have a great privilege to welcome Purnima Kochikar, Vice President of Business Development, Games and Applications at Google Play. Purnima oversees strategy, operations, partnership management, technical and growth consulting. Her team partners both with the leading companies as well as the budding entrepreneurs to create effective mobile businesses that can reach the global audiences. Purnima will be joined by our grand keynote speaker, Surbhi Sarna today. Surbhi is a partner at Y-Combinator and the author of her book, Without a Doubt. Previously, she was the founder and former CEO of nVision Medical. Under her leadership, nVision developed a first-in-kind microcatheter for the detection of ovarian cancer. After raising $17 million in venture funding, completing 3 clinical trials, and obtaining 2 first-in-class FDA approvals, nVision was acquired by Boston Scientific for $275 million. Presently, Surbhi is Y-Combinator's only and the first partner focused exclusively on healthtech, medical devices, and therapeutics. Surbhi is also the board member of various private and public companies. During publication of her book, Without a Doubt, Surbhi had said that she was underrated and doubted in her entire life. So stay tuned to learn how Surbhi's transformation from underrated to unbeatable took place in the last 12 years. So ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together to welcome Purnima Kochikar and our entrepreneurial diva, Surbhi Sarna.
Good afternoon. How is everyone doing? I am excited that we're kicking off TiEcon. Isn't it awesome to be back in person? Yeah. A little bit more excitement, people. Okay, fabulous. I'm excited that we're kicking off with an amazingly inspirational story. All right. Welcome to TiEcon, Surbhi. You've been described as many different things. Engineer, entrepreneur, CEO, author, investor. But before all of that, she was patient. Take us back to 13-year-old Surbhi. An ordinary day becomes extraordinary. What happened?
Yeah, thank you everybody for having me here this evening and giving me a little bit of your time. I'm really excited to share a bit of the story. How's that? The mic is also echoing. I almost feel like throwing this mic away and just speaking to you, but I'll resist the urge. So I got into entrepreneurship because entrepreneurship found me. And like Purnima said, I was 13 years old in high school as a sophomore, writing a paper on Emerson, when all of a sudden I felt such a sharp pain in my side that I could barely make it to my mom, who was at the kitchen at the time, and say my side hurts before blacking out. The next thing I remember is waking up in the hospital. And of course, there was no way for me to know it then, but it was going to be the first of many trips. That night, they almost rolled me in for surgery for appendicitis, but luckily, last second, the surgeon realized that wasn't what was ailing me. It took about a week for them to diagnose that I was suffering from complex ovarian cysts, but it took months and months more for them to be able to tell me whether or not those cysts were cancerous. So from the unnecessarily long diagnostic times to the lack of therapeutic options, I realized that women's health isn't where it should be, and I sort of began my journey from being a patient to an impatient entrepreneur.
That is so inspirational. When we spoke, I asked you, from that health scare, Why did you decide to be an engineer versus maybe be a doctor or a researcher?
You know, when I was in high school, so I went to the Harker School, go Eagles, just in case anyone's in the audience. And I was blessed with an extraordinary biology teacher, Miss Chetty, who is still teaching there today. And she would stay with me after school to kind of conduct experiments to better understand the disease state that I was suffering from. And so even at the time, I was actually more inclined to writing, to English literature. My mom's a PhD in Hindi literature. But my scientific mind sort of began to grow that way. And then when I went to Berkeley, again, you know, I was studying the sciences, I was doing research in engineering. And I just remembered that when I was going through my own scare, and I was going through all of the diagnostic tests that I was going through, how many people have had an X-ray done, or an MRI done, or a CT scan, or had to have used a catheter? And I still think, of course, that physicians carry one of the greatest responsibility in our society. But when you think of scale of impact, you can only really get that through innovation. You know, if you're going to create something that lasts a lifetime. So that's sort of what drew me.
Now, if you take your next step, you are obviously affected. I'm sorry, this cooperating. And then you're becoming this entrepreneur. You have this audacious ambition of improving ovarian cancer diagnostics. And one would think your story and your commitment should make it easy, but it wasn't, is it? Tell us about raising money and what tips can you give the people in the audience of how to do it well?
Right. Yeah, I hope that there are aspiring entrepreneurs in the audience. There's nothing quite like it. So I graduated from Berkeley and I worked in industry for just a few years. And then at that time, my grandmother was actually diagnosed with breast cancer in India, and I took a break from work. I flew to India and I was part of her care. And I think that her eventual loss hit me hard enough where I thought, I don't want to wait to do this anymore. You know, I was 24 at the time, and I was thinking that I would get experience into my early 30s, or something like that, or some arbitrary number, 10 years of experience, before starting a company. But her loss was just so impactful, I thought, let me give this a try. And there was new research that actually ovarian cancer is a misnomer and should be called fallopian tube cancer, because the most lethal forms of ovarian cancer, the most aggressive forms, actually begin in the fallopian tube. And so I started ideating, you know, just like you do with a pap smear where you can collect cells from the cervix on an annual basis, what if there was a way, without making an incision, to be able to get into the fallopian tube and collect cells and check for ovarian cancer, again on an annual basis? And I didn't have, you know, much money saved up at the time, just being a few years out of school. So I continued to work full time, but I started talking to investors. And oh my gosh, I used to tell this story and say that I got rejected 50 times before I got a no. But then when I was writing my book, I went back and actually looked at the emails, and it's much more than 50. I just think you stop counting after 50. It's like a lot of rejection. I got a ton of no's from different investors. And I'm often asked kind of what kept me going at that moment. Look, I'm an investor now, so I know I'm allowed to say this, right? Because I'm an investor. Investors don't know what they're talking about. It's like you know your product, you know your customer, you know the need because you've spent the time having the conversations, right? So I was lucky enough to have had a mentor who had told me, go speak to dozens of physicians before you fundraise. And you know, when she first said that to me, I said, well, where am I going to find gynecologists, right? Gynecologists are going to be the ones that do this procedure. I had only a few years of working experience, and I had working experience in the cardiovascular space. So I'm sitting there thinking, how am I going to find a gynecologist? How am I going to find and then I remembered I didn't know one gynecologist. And so I called my gynecologist, poor Dr. Cook, feigned a stomach ache, and in the middle of an exam, if you can imagine her surprise, said, hey, I have a catheter concept I want to talk to you about. She refused to talk to me at that moment, but did agree to meet me at a cafe, where she really liked the idea. She introduced me to the head of women's health at Stanford, who continued to introduce me, to the Cleveland Clinic and so on. And so when I was getting all of those no's from investors, it was the conversations that I had with patients. It was the conversations that I had with physicians that kind of kept me going in the face of it, And I really believe that if you're building something people want, and in healthcare, if you're building something people need, the money will come, It's trying to be scrappy and resourceful and keeping that good indignation alive while getting rejected.
That, I think, brings us to you being an author, another hat that you have worn. And you chose a very interesting sentiment or emotion to write your book about, without a doubt. How did that come about?
Yeah, my company that I started, nVision, was acquired by Boston Scientific in 2018, and there was big, headlines about it everywhere. nVision Medical acquired for $275 million and all of that. And I looked at it and I thought, gosh, these articles are really making it sound like I knew what I was doing the whole time, like it happened overnight, like the glory was in the number itself versus the team that I built, the joy that I found working on something that I truly believed in. And it didn't touch upon the self-doubt that I felt and how much doubt I got from other people and how I had to work through that, how much we all have to work through that, right? And for me, I've always felt a little bit on the outside, even as a kid growing up, I had some unique interests. Bringing bugs to your desk during recess does not make you popular. It does help build your scientific method though. And I wanted to share the real story in the book of what it took, and what it took to overcome that self-doubt, right? The only thing that you are without a doubt about when you are a founder is that you are building a product that people truly need, Otherwise, there's a ton of doubt that comes your way. And honestly, that doubt is what keeps you on your toes. It's what keeps you honest. It's what makes you see risk before it's at your doorstep.
So let's talk about you're writing this book, but it is also the culmination of a process that you have yourself used to process doubt. In our conversation preparing for this talk, you said something very profound, I thought. It's important not to doubt those who believe in you. So let's talk about your process in both having good mentors, believing in those, letting people believe in you, but also processing doubt.
Yeah, I would say that along my entrepreneurial journey, or just my career in general, there's people who've seen promise in me even before I was able to see it in myself. Maybe even starting with my teachers at Harker, who are willing to give me their time. And I think that the doubt goes two ways. I think that when you're in the beginning of your career, I think especially in this social media crazed society that we live in now, it's very easy to want to associate with and reach out to and only get the bright and shiny mentors that have the big titles and all of that. And of course, those people can be helpful, but sometimes the help you need is right in front of you. You don't only have to stand on the shoulder of giants to kind of get ahead. So first, there's wisdom and help in empowering those around you who want to help you. And I can talk about the way that I did finally get that first check. And then the other part of just processing your own doubt is realize when you're feeling it so that when someone else is trying to inspire confidence you let them. There might be someone more experienced who sees something in you that you don't quite see yourself. And if any of you have ever been in the situation, even outside of being an entrepreneur, where there's a job opening and folks are calling you to it and you're like, what? That's that feeling. Just go with it. Someone's seeing something in you, let it happen.
So that's, very profound and important, because I think when you're doubting yourself, it's always sometimes hard to believe why others are believing in you. The other aspect that came out in, I Google stalked you on different things.
It's expected these days, I think.
The other aspect that came out was there's something that you also talked about. There is the aspect of asking for help, but also valuing time. The time you put in, the time others put in you, and now you're on the other side. How do you protect your time? You're a young mom, you wear many hats, but also how should people think about time?
Oh man, I think that it can be really easy to shift our mindset and start thinking that money is the most valuable asset that we have, when truly, no matter who you are, your time is the most valuable asset and what you choose to do with that time, right? And so when I got up here on the stage and the first thing I said was, thank you for spending this time with me, I actually meant it. I actually felt it when I said it. It wasn't a generic thing that you say when you start a talk. And that was the way that I approached every single person that did any work for me at nVision. I recognized that by choosing to work for me, to choosing to work on this shared dream that we had, that they were delivering their most valuable asset. And then at the same time, I am a mom of 2 young kids. I have a 3-year-old and a 6-year-old, and I signed the deal to sell the company when my oldest one was a year old. And so it was a lot of balancing. And I do think that work has a way of seeping into everything unless you protect that time kind of proactively. And I know it's been said before, but very few people on their deathbed say, I spent too much time with my family, right? So
I want to tap in a little bit in what you said about the people who worked for you, and you had that gratitude of time. So let's take this hat that you wore as a CEO about how you build teams, because who spends time with you is also important.
Absolutely, yeah.
As well as this gratitude of time that I think was the foundation of the culture you built in that company. Let's talk about teams and culture.
Yeah, I think these days, especially in this world of layoffs, which, is part of business and sometimes needs to happen, I think expressing that gratitude towards people is something that's so both underrated and underestimated as a thing to do. When folks were leaving nVision, and then I brought this kind of idea over to Boston Scientific as well, at the end of the day, we would say, bye, thank you. Because man, that is something for someone to choose to spend that day with you, doing that work with you, And I think that whatever cultural values you have within your group or your company, because remember, culture will happen either because someone is trying to build it deliberately or it'll happen by accident, right? But if you have this baseline of gratitude for the other person that's working with you or for you, I think that's such a solid base upon which to build everything else.
That's such a wonderful sentiment. That brings us to today. You are a group partner at Y-Combinator. You get to do this with lots of entrepreneurs, inspire them both in what they build, but also how they build. Talk to us about today.
Yeah. Well, going back to my own fundraising story a little bit, right? So I had 50 plus rejections from folks. And then finally, I was introduced to this woman out of Boston named Darshna Zaveri. And Darshna was not then a partner, but an associate or principal at a venture fund called Catalyst Health. And she did about 6 months of diligence before bringing me in to meet the rest of her partners. All right, it's a big partnership meeting. They all get together to say yes or no to the investment. And oh my gosh, it was the very last name I had sort of on my Rolodex, my list of connections. So I had prepared for that meeting so well. And I really think I did a great job presenting it. You know, every question that they asked me, I had a great answer for, and I was feeling really good about it, really hopeful. Darshana walked me back to my car and said, hey, have a safe flight home. I'm going to call you with some good news tomorrow. So obviously it was really hard not to count chickens at that point. And I remember setting my alarm for 4 a.m. or something stupid like that because she was on the East Coast time, right? So I wanted to be awake. Of course, she waited before she called, so that was unnecessary. But she called and she said, you know, Surbhi, I'm so sorry. I just couldn't get my partnership there. You're too risky of an investment. You know, you're a first-time founder. You don't have anything but a slide deck and a dream. In terms of risk, you're just as risky as it gets. And we just can't do this deal. And I remember feeling completely dejected and feeling that doubt, but then allowing myself the space to feel it. I climbed back into bed. I threw the covers over my face, and I realized that Darshana, even though she said no, wanted to say yes, wished she could say yes. So I called her back and I said, Darshana, if you do this deal with me, I will also take on risk. I will not draw salary for the first 2 years of the company. Until we raise our next round of funding, I will move back home with my parents, and I will do everything I can to make this work. So at that point, Darshana went back to her partnership and said, hey, listen, guys, either we invest in Surbhi or you allow me to break my contract, and I'm going to invest as an individual. I'm going to do this deal one way or the other. And then they said, okay, fine, if you want to do it that badly. And this is for 250 grand. I mean, this isn't for like $10 million or something. But so she said yes, and then we were off to the races. And so, you know, you asked me about Y-Combinator now and how seriously I take kind of this role and responsibility. I know that I'm a gatekeeper in a way for a lot of extremely early stage startups who are in that phase that I was in, where it is just a concept. It is just a dream. Maybe there's a little bit of code that's been done. I also invest a lot in healthcare companies. So maybe a target's been identified, or, you know, it's really, really early in the process. And I know what it meant for my life and my career and what I worked on so passionately for the next 10 years after, to have Darshana go to her partnership and take that risk for me. And so I intend to do the same for my founders, for my entrepreneurs. If you're working on something and I can see the impact on society, I can see the impact on medicine as we know it, on healthcare as we know it, I will go to bat for you.
Wow. We're at the end of our time, but I know without a doubt that you will have amazing impact on Y-Combinator, on healthcare, and how we think about health in general. Thank you for sharing your story with us, but more importantly, sharing the lessons about connecting with all of us as what we feel, the doubts, dealing with doubts, and finding our Darshanas to invest in us.
Yeah,
thank you, Surbhi.
Absolutely. Thank you for your time.